And this is our official start of CS40 today. So welcome everybody who's just joined us. Um, I have posted your next and last homework assignment. So we'll start today by going over the details of that homework assignment. And again, as a reminder, at this point, all of your previous work has been graded. And so you should be able to go through and decide exactly what you need on this last homework assignment in order to get the grade that you want in this course. And um, so hopefully there will be no surprises for you, and that you can have at least in this class, a relaxed last bit of the semester. So I'm going to share the screen now, and the homework assignment is posted in our homework 5 folder on the GitHub repository. And again, in this homework, we're creating a Twitter clone. So the due date, I'll talk a little bit about this more later, but you have any time between November 30th and December 6th, so it's all finals week, to display, to demo your code for me. This particular assignment is going to require that it's not going to be something that you submit on Sakai. It's going to be something that you'll have to log into Zoom for a one-on-one session and show me all the different features of your web page. When I was doing this in person, it only took about a minute to do it. So I'm guessing Zoom, it might be a little bit longer, but I don't know, 5 to 10 minutes tops is all that it will take. But I'll have details about that once we get to that time, about how you can schedule those sorts of things with me. At this point, though, I'll just say that if you do pick one of the earlier dates, you will have a chance to do a follow-on Zoom session to fix any problems that I find and have a second chance at getting your final project graded. So that would be one of the advantages of targeting an earlier date to get everything done by. Maria, do you have a question?
Yeah, I don't think like the extra credit for lab 9 is counted on Sakai because it's like displayed in the assignments but not in the gradebook.
Okay, somebody mentioned that last time as well, and I double checked it, and at least on my perspective, it looks counted. So maybe after the main part of lecture today, somebody can show me from your perspective what it looks like on Sakai, so I can see what the problem is to get it fixed. But I want to hold off on doing that until after we cover the material for today to make sure that we cover it all.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
But yeah, if there are any sort of issues with your grade, whether it's something sort of bigger like that, an assignment's not being counted, or just something small about like why your particular assignment is a certain number of points, how it is, this week and next week would be the time to get that resolved, so that as we come into finals week, the only thing that you have left is this final project. There will be also a lab this week and next week, but the way these labs are going to work is I'm essentially going to tell you how far along you should be on this final project, and the lab is just going to be making sure that you're keeping pace with the final project. So I will, the lab for this week's not posted yet. After we cover the material for today, depending on how far exactly we get again, I'll have the lab posted tonight. Any other questions so far about anything administrative? Okay. So then back details of the homework assignment. So some of the key ideas of this homework assignment, key learning objectives. All of your previous assignments, you've pretty much only been using a single Python file. Some of you for the Reddit bot may have used multiple Python files. But in this assignment, what we're going to end up with is your final web page is going to have something between like 10 to 50 files in it, depending on how exactly you do things. And so you'll get some experience managing these sorts of large Python programs. The technical term for this type of web page is called a CRUD app. So CRUD is an acronym standing for Create, Read, Update, and Delete. And basically all social media websites, all Web 2.0 websites fall into this pattern where you're using storing something in a database, and the web page is really just an interface for creating entries in the database, reading from the database, updating to the database, and deleting from the database. Yeah, this is really, or this word CRUD is a technical term that is commonly used, and all web developers will know what you're talking about if you say that you've developed a CRUD app. And they will not think it's a bad thing, even though the acronym sounds like it would be a bad thing. It's actually a well-respected thing. So you see how, since we're implementing a Twitter version, you'll see how Twitter actually works under the hood, and how all of these websites, like a really bare bones version of them, can be built by an experienced programmer over a weekend in their garage. And the problem, or the difficulty, really is scaling it up to millions of users and actually getting people to use it, rather than just developing the interface. And then lastly, this one's kind of related to this first one. We're going to be tying together all the concepts that we've learned in class. You'll be creating Python programs, HTML, CSS, this new Jinja 2 language that we sort of started talking about last time. We'll really start talking about it today. And then the SQL programming language for accessing the database. For the grading rubric, I'm not going to go in too much detail for it right now. We'll talk about the different features of the web page and how they'll be graded as we discuss those features over the next week or so in class. But the big picture idea is that it's going to be graded in a similar style to how the Reddit bot homework was created. There's these 5 required tasks right here. Each one of these tasks will correspond to a different web page, or a different page inside of your web page, a different route in your web page, in your Flask app. And if you complete all of these required tasks, then you'll get 15 out of the 25 points for the assignment. And then there's a whole bunch of extra credit that you get to pick and choose what you want to do to get the remaining points, or to go beyond 25 points. And yeah, there's all sorts of different options here. I'll let you take a look at them on your own time, but essentially it's just more features that you might expect from a social media website like Twitter. In general, in class, we're going to, and through the labs, you'll implement like 90% of this work up here. And then the extra credit parts is the stuff that you'll have to kind of do on your own, figure out on your own. Any questions about anything related to the homework at this point? Okay, then we are going to continue talking about Flask today, and really go into what this Jinja 2 templating language is capable of in class today. And then as a reminder, if you were to look inside of the folder for week 11, all the files that we created have been uploaded there. I'll upload again after class today the changes that we make today. So you'll have access to look at these files while you're working on this homework. And so here I have switching over to VS Code. And I'll do just a quick reminder of what's going on in this code. We had our twitter.py file, which defined all of the different routes that we're using. I slightly changed the formatting of this file just to make it a little bit more clear what are the important parts and not important parts. But these lines up here are called decorators, and they define what is the URL that your user will visit. And when they visit that URL, the following function will be run, and whatever the return value of that function is what's going to get displayed to Firefox. And so we saw that you can just do something like returning a string like this, and then this string value would get returned to Firefox. But that's a little bit sort of obnoxious because you'd have to include your entire web page as a string inside of Python. And so this render template function was really the thing that we wanted to use to for each of the routes. That we do render template, and then an HTML file. It gets passed in as a parameter. And that HTML file is contained within a folder called templates. And that function essentially just takes this content right here and passes it to to Firefox to display. We also saw that in these routes, it's possible to have these sort of variables like this. So here, username is a variable where somebody can go /user and then /Mike or /Trump/Biden. And then render template will call the user.html in this case, but passing in this variable name to user.html. And then here, this special syntax right here with these two curly braces substitutes this username variable for the actual contents of that variable, and we get a custom web page designed for each particular user. To run these Flask programs, it's just pressing the triangle button, and it opens, or here down here in the terminal, this is the output. This right here is the URL that we have to visit in Firefox in order to, whoops. This URL is the URL we have to visit in Firefox in order to view our web page. So we'll go open up a new tab in Firefox and visit that URL. And this was the results that where we left off from our web page. So what we're going to do next is I'm going to take this index.html, and I want to start by modifying it to sort of start fitting the format of our homework assignment. That one of the requirements of the homework assignment was that we had these 5 different web pages that somebody can visit. And so I want to include a menu in my web page right here, so that those 5 web pages are things that people can click on. And a href equals, one of them was we needed a home for people to visit. And anytime when we're doing an href here, so creating a link, if you're linking to your own web page, you'll always want it to start with /. So the thing right here inside of href is always going to match exactly whatever is contained in your routes over here. And so there was a home, a login, a logout, a create message, and a create account. Those were the 5 routes that we needed in our web page. And this is going to serve as the menu for our web page. And so just to make sure that's working, I'm going to visualize it in Firefox. And again, every time when I make a page to my Flask web page, whether it's in the HTML or the Python or anything, I'm going to press Control-C down here to stop the Flask web server, and then restart the web server up here with the triangle button. You notice the triangle button's not available right now because I'm currently on an HTML page. In order to get the triangle button available, I have to switch over to my Python file like that. Now the triangle button's available, I can press it, and we go back over here, refresh this file, and now I have these 5 buttons available. And if I click one of these, so I'll press the home button, you can see I get this 404 error message because I've added these buttons, but I haven't actually told Python what to do when somebody, say, visits this home route or when somebody visits the logout route. And so all of these buttons are currently going to generate these error messages for me. So the next thing that I have to do is I'll have to create routes for each of these files, or for each of these paths right here. And then in each of those routes, I'll also want a different HTML file that is going to display what goes along with each one of those routes. So we'll start by just doing this, this home route, coming back over to twitter.python, and I'll just copy and paste this like this, /home, and we'll have our home.html like this. So we'll save that and rerun this. Oops, I'll have to press Control-C down here, and then rerun this with the triangle button. And I'm getting an error message in Python. So sometimes when we get error messages, the web server will not run at all, and that's what's happening right here. This error message is in Python, and it's specifically saying that it's in my twitter.py file at line 8. So if I go to line 8, which is conveniently highlighted in red right here, it's telling me that this function root is already defined. And so I needed to also rename this function, and I'll rename it as home. Again, it's convenient to name your functions based on what the route is that they go along with. Now we'll save that and press the triangle button. And you notice that there are no Python errors that happen. So I'll come over here in Firefox and press this home button. And I'm getting this weird looking error message saying internal server error. And now when I come back over to VS Code, you'll notice that down here, there's all of this Python kind of junk error message that, that appeared. And this Python junk error message happened after all of, after the Python code actually ran successfully. So this error message right here, all of this Python error is in response to me visiting this particular web page. Anytime you visit a web page and you get this internal server error, it means if you go back over to Python, back to VS Code, there will be one of these big Python error messages that tells you exactly what the problem is. And it'll be a pain in the butt to look through this and try to find exactly what the problem is. But the way you do it is you go line by line, looking for the line that mentions your code. So here, this is a Flask line, that's not me, another Flask line, this one's Ginger2, not me, not me, not me, not me. And here we go, here's twitter.py, this one is actually corresponding to my code. And you can see that this line right here is buried right in the middle of this error message. So in the past, when we've seen these really long error messages, it's been very common, you may have noticed that your code would be at the very top of these big long error messages. But that's not the case when you're using this Flask framework. Your code is going to be buried somewhere in the middle, and you'll have to look through it starting at the bottom, going line by line up until you find your code. And here it says the error message is on line 10. So let's make the terminal a little bit smaller now and find line 10. So here's the problem line. And we'll see what the problem is. In order to see what the actual problem is, we look at the very last line of the error message. So down here, it says template not found. And if I didn't know, if I couldn't guess what the error message meant just from this, I would Google that to see, to get some clues from other people, or I would look in the Flask documentation trying to find this template not found keyword somewhere. But the name is suggestive enough that it suggests to me that I forgot to create this home.html file. And so I created this route. I called this render template function, but I'm calling it on a file that doesn't exist. And so in order to make this work, I have to come here in templates, go new file, and do home.html right here. And now that I have this file, when render template runs, it will be able to actually load this file, and it'll display the contents right here. So what contents will I use? Well, I know that I want to have this menu displayed on every HTML page in my Twitter clone. So I'm going to start by just copying and pasting this index.html into home.html right here. And now I will change this h1 to be, this is the home page, and down here in the paragraph, I will say, welcome home, smiley face. We'll save that. And I've made some changes to my code, both in the Python and in the HTML. So I'm going to come down here, press Control-C, and then back up here to the triangle button, rerun that. No error messages. That's great. But it doesn't mean we're out of the woods, because we saw before that error messages don't always happen now right when you run the code. They can happen when people view the code. So we always have to make sure whenever we're creating our Python program, not to just run it, but to also look at the web page itself. This is the route that I wanted to test. So I'm just going to press the refresh button to load that. And there we go. It looks like it actually worked this time. We'll come back over to VS Code, and we'll see that there are no error messages that happened. So that's great. Are there any questions about anything that I just did? Okay. The two key takeaways from what we just talked about was that every time you are creating a new route in your program, so anytime you have a new link that points to a new location, you need to do two things. You need to add the route in Python like this, and you need to create a new HTML file just for that route. So that's the first thing to take away. And then the second thing to take away was that debugging process about how there are certain types of error messages, like a syntax error like this, where if I try to run the program just won't even run at all. And I have to fix it here before running it. And now the program will run. Those types of error messages are generally relatively easy to fix and figure out what's going on. But then that other type of error message that only happens when you visit a route, those can be more difficult to figure out what's going on. And you have to be very careful looking through that Python output to figure out exactly which line the error message is happening on. I'm sure as I'm typing throughout today, I will mistype something and we will see more examples of that. But the next thing for us to talk about is, and really what we're going to be talking about all today, is all of the features of this Jinja 2 templating language. And the first thing that I want to emphasize is, again, we're hackers. We hate repeating ourselves. Hackers are lazy, and copying and pasting is really bad. The reason copying and pasting is really bad is because now let's say this home route, instead of going to /home, I actually wanted it to go to just the root web page, just / like this. And so I can remember to do that right here on home.html, but I also have to remember to do that everywhere else where I have this, this menu. And this menu is going to appear in all of my HTML files because I want it to appear on every web page that is in my Twitter clone. And we saw way back in our first homework assignment in this class that HTML by itself has no features for you to sort of include other HTML documents inside of it. And if you are only using HTML, when you're creating these menus, you have to manually adjust every HTML file with the changes that you're going to make. But Jinja gives us this really cool way of sort of circumventing that. and creating a sort of a separate file that just contains the menu, and then linking that with all of our code so the menu is automatically added. And that's what we're going to talk about next is how you do that with Jinja. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new HTML file up here, and I'm going to call it base.html. And the reason I'm calling it base.html is because this is going to form sort of like the foundation or the base of all of the other HTML files that I'm going to create. And I'm going to start it off by copying this, all of this contents right here into base.html. And what I want every HTML file to have is some sort of header like this, and then some sort of list like this. But then the contents down here, what happens after the list is going to be different for every different web page. And so in order to indicate that in Jinja, I'm going to add this special command right here. I'll say block content. I want a space right here. And then right here, I'm going to say end block like that. And what this is going to indicate is that this is going to be the location that we will copy and paste content into in order to generate our final HTML document. So yeah, that'll become more clear as we adjust our other files to work with this as well. So I'll answer questions once I finish up the full example. So now in this index.html, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete everything that's sort of standard content that's going to appear everywhere. So here in index.html, I'm going to delete our header up here. I'm going to delete this menu. And I'm going to leave my hello world and leave my image because those are going to be specific to just this web page. And then what I'm going to do is at the very top, I'm going to write extends base.html like this. And this line right here tells, will tell Flask, tell Jinja that we're going to be working with the base.html file as sort of the root of the, or the template, the format that we're going to be following. This is very similar to sort of like the import line in Python. It's like including this base.html file. And then in order for Flask, in order for Jinja to know that this is the contents that should be substituted right here into block content, I have to tell it that. And I'll tell it that by saying block content and block. Save this. And you'll notice that this content, or sorry, these lines right here, block content and end block, are the same exact as these lines right here. And that's how Jinja knows that when it finds these in the base.html, which is the file that we're including or extending right here, it will substitute everything between this line and this line. So substitute this content right here into base.html right here. So let's test this out, make sure it works. Come down here, Control-C to end the web server. No triangle button up here, so I go to twitter.py to get the triangle button, press the triangle button. No error messages, that's good. Come over here and let's visit our root web page, and we still get the same exact contents that we had before. So that's good. We didn't mess anything up with this change, but we still haven't used the full power of this extends and block keyword yet, because our home.html file now still has all of this boilerplate, all this duplicate code inside of it. So what I'm going to do now is delete all of this, come up to the top again and say extends base.html like that, and then block content and end block like that. We'll save that. Come down here, Control C to end Flask. Come over to twitter.py, triangle button to run the program. No error messages. Come over here. We'll refresh this web page. That all looks good. Now we'll go to the home route, hit enter. Uh-oh, we got an internal server error. Let's see what my problem is. I got this Jinja undefined error, base is undefined. I have to come up here to find the line where it's happening. It's line 10 in render home.html, line 10 render home.html. So I'm going to look inside of my home.html file, and the problem is that I forgot to put the file name in quotation marks. When you use this extends functionality, you have to put quotation marks around the base.html right here. One of the really frustrating things of working with Flask that you'll notice is that this error message right here, it told me where in the Python the error message occurred. The error message occurred right here in the Python, but it did not tell me where in the Jinja file or where in the HTML file the error occurred. I had to actually go through here and look at it manually and figure out that it was on this first line. If you have a problem in your Jinja code, in your Jinja syntax somewhere, there's no way just from this output here to figure out exactly what the problem is. And so my very strong recommendation when you're writing these files is if you're ever changing one of these syntaxes that's involving Jinja, just do exactly one thing at a time and try it and make sure it works. And that way, if you do get an error message, you know exactly that it was exactly where the error message happened at. It was the thing that you just changed. Okay, so let's try that. We'll see if that actually fixed it. Control C, stop it, come over to twitter.py, press the triangle button, run that, no error messages. Come over to Firefox, press the refresh button, and everything worked. And we can see that we still have this menu right here that's included in our base.html. And if I were to change my menu by saying up here, visit the home, and we'll add that back to home, and then up here, visit the root, and save that. Come down here, Control C, over to twitter.python, run it, come over here, press refresh. We can see that it automatically changed in our home, the menu, and it automatically changed in our root what the menu is. So much, much easier to do the formatting of our web page and making sure that everything is consistent along web pages now that we have access to this Jinja system that lets us include HTML files. Okay, yeah, that was a lot of material that we just covered. So are there any questions about that, Marie?
Can we go over what did we do in the base.html file?
Sure. So inside of base.html, the idea of the base.html file is that it contains all of the HTML code that you want to be the same on every web page. And the things that I want to be the same on every web page are, I want to include my style sheets on every web page, and I want to have this menu on every web page. And so that's why that's what's in the inside of base.html. This part right here, block content, this is going to be sort of the part that's different about every web page. And so if I come back over to Firefox on my root path, so there's nothing up here, so this is the root path, that's where I was displaying this image and this hello world. But if I click on visit the home, the content is now, it just says welcome home. And so both of those two things are getting substituted right here to generate different HTML pages. The way Flask knows what to substitute into these spots is inside of home.html. I have these lines right here. Because it says block content right here, and in base.html it says block content right here, that's how it knows to substitute this line right here into that location for base.html. And then in index.html, it has different content right here, and so it'll substitute something different right there and generate a different web page for me.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so a high-level idea for your final assignment, you're going to have a different HTML file for each one of these things. The format of those HTML files will all look something like this, extending base, and the difference will just be what goes inside of here. And what goes inside of there will depend on exactly the purpose of each of those pages. Tanya?
Hi, Mike. I have a quick question. Let's say you have sort of multiple things that you want to block content in. So every time, like, for example, after line 5, you want something from the base.html file, but then you want something that's, again, different. So anytime you want something different, you just need to put block content.
Great question. So, like, what if we want to substitute multiple things instead of just one thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what this block thing is what's used for substitution. And this part right here is like a variable name that just tells us which substitution is going to happen. And so I called this content just because it's like the content of our web page, but we could call it whatever we wanted. And so let's say I wanted to have something above as well. And so maybe this will be block title. We'll have a title block at the top and a content block at the bottom. Then over here on home.html, I could have a title block, and we'll say make it h2 homepage /h2. And now this will get substituted into that title area. I'm not going to put a title under the index.html, and we'll see that that just means that it defaults to being blank. So now I'll have to make sure all these files are saved. Come down here, press Control-C to end the web server over here. Triangle button to run it. No errors, that's great. Over here, visit the root, and notice that there's no like title message above here. But now when I visit the home, it has this title message right here saying homepage. So in general, you can have as many of these blocks as you want, and they can be located anywhere in the HTML, and you can get very complicated web page formats that way. That's a great question. Let's see, in terms of your homework assignment, for all the required assignments, for the required parts of the homework, all you need to do is do this block content. But there are some extra credit assignments that would require you adding other blocks like this. So if you choose to do those extra credits, that's what you would have to do. Both great questions so far. Any other questions? Okay. So let's see. The next thing for us to talk about is this Jinja actually lets us support if statements as well. And so on our home page, for example, we might want to, rather than just saying welcome home, specifically like greet the person who we are welcoming. And we saw before that we can do this sort of variable substitution by using this syntax like this with these two curly braces. And then whatever is inside here is the name of our variable that's going to be substituted. So if we want to specifically welcome somebody by their username, we would put username right here. And then over in our Python file, when we call the render template function, we'll have to use this particular format right here, where we pass in this username parameter. And so I'm going to put this on its own line so it's a little bit easier to read. And then we'll say username, and this time I will just hard code the username to be Mike. I'm doing that right now to illustrate the difference between what I'm doing here and here. Down here, I'm using this username is a parameter that's coming from the particular URL that somebody's visiting. And so that's a very common way to pass parameters into our render template function, but it's not the only way to pass parameters into our render template function. And we'll soon see that another very common way that we're going to want to do it is to pass sort of the results from a select statement into our database, into our render template functions. But for now, I'll just hard code this as Mike so we can just double check that that's going to work correctly, and rerun this, come back over here and visit the home, and it says welcome Mike, which is great. And so now what I want to do is we'll see that, let's see, yeah, we'll do it in the base.html. So one of your requirements for your homework assignment is that each of these menu buttons is only sometimes visible. So like this log out button, you would not want to have the log out button be visible if the person is not logged in already. And conversely, the login button, you would not want to have the login button be visible unless the person is currently logged out. And so we can use if statements in Jinja to make that happen. So the way the syntax for that looks is you do if, and then the variable that you're trying to check to see whether it exists or doesn't exist. So here, if username, and this will be true if username is provided as a parameter into render template. So here username equals none, so username will be true. And yeah, so it'll do the login button. And then we can have an else and say if this part was, if this part did not get displayed, then display this part right here. And then at the end, we have end if, like that. And now the login and logout buttons will not both be visible at the same time. You're only going to see one of them or see the other of them. So in order to demonstrate that, we'll save all these files, come down here, Control-C this, over to twitter.python, triangle button to run it, come over to Firefox, refresh this web page, and now you can see that the log out button disappeared. It is no longer available, but the login button is available. There's no, the way my program's configured right now, there's nothing I can do just from Firefox in order to make the logout button appear, because we haven't talked about how you would how you would track whether a user is logged in or logged out yet. And so in order to make the logout button appear and the login button disappear, what I have to do is just comment out this line right here. And now since this username is no longer going to be passed into render template, when we come to base.html, this line right here will be false, and it will only give us this line right here. And so I'll save that and come down here, Control-C that, triangle button, run it, come back up here, refresh this web page, and now we see the log out button instead of the login button.
Mike, why did we choose like username? Like, what is the relationship between having a username and being logged out or logged in?
Great question. So the the purpose of this discussion so far is just to demonstrate the syntax of how you use this if statement and this else statement and this and if statement, and to see exactly what this syntax does. In order to like make it a little bit maybe slightly better example of why you would want to do something like this, the username variable is maybe only going to be specified if the person is logged in. So if the person is logged in, then it will be whatever the name is that they're logged in as. And if the person is not logged in, then it will not exist. And so in that case, I would want to have log out be what is being displayed when username is present, when this evaluates to true, and login be displayed when this is false, when there's no username. So pass the username if the person is logged in. Maybe a slightly more detailed pseudocode will have a variable logged in equals true. If logged in, then we would call something like this. Otherwise, they're not logged in, so we would call something like this without this parameter right here. And specify username equals Mike. So we'll pass in the particular username right here. And then this code combined with our code in the base.html handles the displaying of what to do when somebody is logged in versus not logged in. And all we have to do now is figure out how do we actually determine whether somebody is logged in versus not logged in. Yeah, I guess the important thing though is to just understand that Jinja supports if statements, and this is the syntax for the if statements. Oops. Good questions. Are there any other questions so far? Okay, then the next thing for Jinja that we'll talk about, and this will be the last thing for Jinja that we'll talk about, is that it supports for loops as well. And so we'll talk about why you might want to support a for loop. And in particular, on this homepage, the requirement is that you be able to display all of the messages that have been sent in your Twitter application so far. And in order to demonstrate that, we're going to start by just creating a dummy messages variable. And this dummy variable will contain the text of, let's see, our previous messages were, I'm a baby, and then username from my son, Evan, and 3 different messages, one from Evan, one from Biden, and one from Trump. And we're going to pass these messages into this render template function. And then inside of the template itself, we're going to have a for loop that loops through all of these messages and displays all of these messages. So the syntax for these for loops is, we have something that looks like for message in messages. So this syntax looks very similar to the Python syntax, except there's no colon at the end of the line. And then down below, there's an end for, like this. And then we're going to do whatever we want to do with the contents of these messages. So we can say, anytime we want to access one of the values in this message, we have to put it in these double curly brackets like this, because that's how we access variables in Jinja. And we can say message.text to get the text entry of a dictionary. So each one of our messages, each one of these messages is a dictionary. It has a key for text and a key for username. And so when I say message.text, it'll get this text right here from the message. If I said message.username, it would get this value right here. So we can say maybe something like message.username says this. And we'll wrap the whole thing into an HTML paragraph like that. We'll press Control-C down here, come up here, twitter.py, press the triangle button to run it. No errors, that's great. Come over here and visit our home. And now it has these three different messages being displayed. It looks like Evan says, I'm a baby. Biden says, I'm a baby. Trump says, I'm a baby. Let's see, I'll extend this example here in a little bit to hopefully make this a little bit more concrete about what's going on. But are there any questions so far about what the syntax is saying or how to use it? Go ahead, Tanya.
I have a quick question about why are we inputting the messages into the Python file? Couldn't we do it into like a DB file? Because that's normally how we've stored messages before. Is that something?
This is a great question. Yeah, so here I have hard-coded these messages. And the question is, what about our database file? Why aren't we using the messages in our database and displaying those messages? And the answer is that eventually we're going to, but as a first step, we'll just use these hard-coded messages, make sure that we can display these hard-coded messages, and then once we've got that figured out, then all we have to do now is figure out how to take the contents of the database and create a variable called messages that contains that content. And then everything else will work for us automatically. So you'll see like the general pattern of what I'm doing when I'm developing this web page is that the first thing I'm doing is like working on the formatting of the web page, how things get displayed, assuming I already have the information. So here I assumed that I had this logged in variable, assumed I knew what my username is. I'm assuming I know what the messages are. And then once I get things working under those assumptions, I can go back and figure out how do I actually set these values based on the database. And by separating it into those two different concerns, it'll make it a little bit easier to do the debugging, that way you don't have to debug both the database and the Jinja part at the same time. That's a great question.
Thanks, Mike.
Any other questions so far? Okay, so I want to next, we're going to come over to Firefox and I want to actually look at what the HTML is in this Firefox. So I'm going to view the source code of this page, and you'll see down here that it has these three paragraphs that correspond to the three paragraphs from my for loop. All the HTML file, all the HTML code that is contained within these beginning of the for and the end for gets repeated exactly, but then the stuff in the curly braces gets the substitution happening. And really the right HTML for displaying a list of things is to use a table. And anytime you see yourself using a for loop in Jinja, probably what you want to use in HTML is a table. And the syntax for tables, again, is we have this opening table tag and then a closing table tag. And then every row in a table, TR stands for row, and then TD stands for table data. Every column will be in a TD / TD. And then TD / TD like that. And now instead of /P / TR. And now I'm going to have a table where each row in the table corresponds to just a different message. And I can add a nice little header if I want as well, TR and then TD with username, and whoops, TD message like this. Come down here, Control-C, stop the web server, over to twitter.py, triangle button to run the web server, come back over to Firefox. We will go back to the actual web page and refresh this. And now we have this, this table right here. You can see that, yeah, the table is not formatted super nicely, just like our menu up here is not formatted super nicely. We could go into the CSS in order to change these formattings to make them look nicer. And that's one of the extra credit opportunities that you have for the assignment, is to update the CSS so that everything looks nice and pretty. But at this point, we're just trying to check to see if things work, check to see if things get onto the HTML. And so I'm not gonna fiddle around with the CSS. But what I will do is we'll see, and this is probably the last thing that we'll have time for today, is to now actually load these messages instead of having them hard-coded like this, load them from the database. And we've already seen how to load things from the database. At the top of our file, we need the import SQLite 3. And then down here, I'm going to create a connection. So connection equals SQLite 3.connect. Let's see, my database file is called Twitter_clone, Twitter_clone.db, like that. And then I'm going to create a cursor from that connection. So connection.cursor. And then I'm going to create a SQL variable like this. And I will select the username and message from messages was the name of the table. And then I will call cursor.execute SQL, and then all of my rows are equal to cursor.fetch all. So all of this that I just typed in right here follows the pattern of connecting to the database that we saw from our previous lab and last week's content. And now what I have to do is I have to construct a list of dictionaries that follows this format right here. So we'll say messages is the empty list, and then for row and rows, the pattern is that I'm going to create a dictionary and append it to messages for each message. So messages.append, and it's a dictionary that I'm creating, and the first dictionary value text should be whatever row of 1 is. So here the message is what I'm putting into the text, and then the username will be row of 0 like this. And now this, if there's no bugs, this code right here, or really all of this code right here, what it's doing is it's just creating a list that looks exactly like this list, or it's in the same exact format as this list. It's a list of dictionaries with keys text and username, and it'll just have different values that correspond to the particular values in my database. And so I'm going to comment out this code right here so that we don't overwrite the messages list that we're constructing here. And now that messages list will get passed into my render template function here, and it will get passed into this HTML code right here, generating this table for us, and hopefully displaying it nice and pretty. So we'll verify that by coming down here, Control C, up here, press the triangle button. No error messages, that's great. Come over back to Jinja, refresh. Uh-oh, we got one of these internal server errors. So we have to come back over here, debug what's going on. Come here, and I see that I have this SQLite operational error. So the fact that the error message says SQLite right here tells me that the error must be in my SQL statement somehow. And it's not related, it's not in my Jinja code, it's not in my Python code, it's not in my HTML, it's going to be in my SQL. And it says that there's no column named username. So in order to figure out exactly what the name of this column was, I'm going to go to my dbcreate.py file and go down to my users. Go down to my messages table and look at the schema. And we'll remember that down here, it doesn't have any column for like username in particular. Instead, it has this sender ID column right here, sender ID. And so over here in my SQLite, instead of doing username, let's change that to sender ID. Save that, come down here into Flask, or sorry, into the terminal, Control C, close that. Execute it. No errors there, that's great. Come over here, refresh it, and now it's correctly displaying the contents of my database. But you can see over here, it is showing the sender ID instead of the username. It's showing the sender ID instead of the username. And so I still have one more step to go in order to get the results that I want, which is to replace these sender IDs with the correct usernames. There are a lot of ways to potentially do this. It is possible to, for example, actually adjust this SQL command right here so that it automatically replaces the sender ID with the corresponding username. These particular syntax for doing that is called a join in SQL. That's how you combine two tables together. It's a more advanced technique in SQL than we're going to talk about in this class though. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to make another SQL query inside of this for loop. And what I want to do is I want to, for each row in this for loop, I want to look up the sender that corresponds to the particular sender ID. So the way that will look like is I'll create another SQL variable. And now I will select username from users, and I'll use that where syntax, where ID equals question mark. Come down here, copy this cursor.execute. Come down here, paste the cursor.execute. Remember that this question mark is going to allow me to substitute a variable into the SQL command, substitute a variable into the SQL command if I pass that variable into the execute command down here. The particular sender ID was this row of 0, the very first thing here. So that's what I'm going to want to pass in right here. And this will now get substituted into as the ID parameter. I can now do the rows equals cursor.fetchAll. But here, notice how I'm already using this row variables before. So I don't want to reuse the same name because it'll overwrite this variable and will screw things up. So instead of calling it rows, I will call it usernames equals cursor.fetchAll. And now for username in usernames, actually I'm going to say for row in usernames. Oh dear. Is Zoom frozen or is just VS Code frozen? Can you all still hear me? Okay,
Yes.
yes. So that's good. Let's see. I'm not sure why VS Code decided to crash. So let's real quickly close it and restart it. And there we go. Looks like it's restarted just fine. Where I was I was typing in this for loop right here for row in usernames. And what I was saying is that we don't want to reuse these row and rows variables. So I'm going to say for username underscore row in usernames underscore rows, or just username underscore rows like this. And now username equals username underscore row of 0. This gets the, there's only one element that's being returned by this select statement right here. So this extracts it, stores it in the username variable, and then down here I will say username instead of row of 0. And this will, if I did everything correctly, give me the actual username instead of the sender ID. So we'll save that. Triangle button to run it. Looks like no error messages so far. That's great. Come over here and refresh that. And now we're getting the actual usernames being displayed correctly over here. So one of the takeaway things here is that you can see that this code right here that's accessing the database is relatively complicated code. And that's, again, one of the reasons why I wanted to wait in order to do the database code, do it separately, so that I could just make sure that the Jinja code, the HTML, and the Python are all working together correctly before trying to interact with the database. And that's why I hard-coded this messages list right here and tried that before doing all of this. Yeah, that'll be a common pattern that we'll be doing throughout the next week or so in class, is starting by hard coding some values and then going into the database to actually access those values. This this database access code is relatively complicated. So then that sort of begs the question of why are we using these databases? Why are we using SQLite instead of just using like a JSON file or a CSV file, where this might be a little bit more simple, the code that comes right here. And the answer, or our first answer to that question, is that the database supports multiple connections to the database at the same time. And so if we imagine coming over here, and right now I'm the only person accessing this Twitter webpage, but if we had, say, 1,000 different users on our Twitter clone who are all trying to access their user accounts at the same time, all trying to read these messages at the same time, then it's very important that our program not crash if somebody else is already loading a particular file. And this SQLite system handles that for us automatically. If we were just using a JSON file, then we would have to go through a lot of extra code to try to handle that. We haven't talked about how to handle multiple programs accessing the same file at the same time. Turns out that's a very complicated problem in computer science, and something that a computer science student, like that's their major, they wouldn't even cover that until like their like 8th or 9th course in computer science. So the fact that we're using SQLite or using a database at all means that we don't have to worry about that. It takes care of those details for us, makes sure that no matter who's accessing the data, it's all just going to work magically. Yeah, I think, let's see, we covered quite a bit of material today, so I don't want to do anything new in the last 5 minutes of the course or so. So I will just, I think, stop the official part of course here, and I'll start the office hours. And if anybody has questions, feel free to ask them. Otherwise, I will see you all either in lab tomorrow or next week.